Hello?
I can hear you now. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
yeah, that was loud.
Huh?
All right. Are we live right now?
Mm-hmm. All right, let's do this. We'll give everybody a few moments and then we'll jump right on in. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Appreciate everybody joining today's webinar. My name is Graham Anderson, co-founder of Importal. Joining me today is Alex Ponte, who is our director of customs at Importal. And what we're going to be talking about today is HTS classification simplified, targeted towards apparel, right? So we are really hyper focused here at Importal about working with apparel companies. So we see this on the front lines every single day. So wanted to pass over some general advice, how to classify, how to think about things like that. But I'll pass it over to Alex, give a brief introduction of himself and kind of his background.
Hey, everybody. How are we doing today? As Graham mentioned, Alex Aponte, Director of Customs here at Importal. Going on my 2-year anniversary here. I'm very excited to be discussing classification and all the nuances with you all today. Don't have many opportunities to really nerd out on customs topics, so looking forward to the conversation today.
Awesome, let's do it. So first and foremost, to jump into this, just brief housekeeping, similar to financial advice, right? Classification is really difficult, and anything that you hear in this conversation, anything you even hear in general from a customs broker is an opinion, right? It is intended to guide you towards the right classification, but at the end of the day, to get a concrete classification that you know is 100% correct, you need to get a customs ruling, which we'd be more than happy to help you with, but just want to call out that classification is pretty complicated for a reason. Perfect. So, why does HTS classification matter so much for apparel brands, right? So, as we all know, those are coming from the apparel industry. New products are being launched all the time, right? We're already looking at the spring season of 27, right? You are looking so far in advance and creating net new seasons that every time you do so, your brand now has a net new tax liability in the form of classification, right? So having to classify all those products every season is difficult, and the scale of that is dependent on how large your brand is. But no matter who you are, big or small, it's a pain. Then financial impact. In general, apparel brands have the highest or some of the highest general duty rates in the United States. So if you just go look at the general rates and check out Chapter 61, for example, you'll see that it tends to flirt between 10 to, in some cases, upwards of 32%. So it's very important to get the classification right, as that can make a big difference. And as I mentioned here, material composition and material structure can mean a big difference. Moving over to more of the compliance side, which is the audit risk. Customs loves looking into apparel brands, mainly for relatively new kind of compliance angle, which is the forced labor, which has become really big with customs. But they also understand back to the new products that you're constantly creating new SKUs, and that can lead to mistakes, which can lead to penalties in some cases 2 to 4 times the duty loss, and possibly criminal charges as well, depending if it's negligence or gross negligence. To jump into how to classify, fortunately enough, customs has laid out the groundworks for us. It is what is called the general rules of interpretation, the GRIs for all my customs nerd out there. And this is a step function to classify a product, right? You start at GRI 1. If that doesn't work, you work your way down to the various rule sets until you finally have your classification for a product. Now, I'm going to let Alex dive into the nitty gritty of GRIs and just how complicated they can become. But we're hopefully by the end of this, you walk away understanding how to start and how to finish a classification.
I would just like to add, I think on its face, right, classification feels like a relatively simple exercise. I open the HTS book, I find a keyword that matches the item that I'm looking to import, and I can land at a classification that feels good. And in some cases, classification can be simple, but of course, right, there's subjectivity in the world, and everyone's going to interpret the HTS book and the keywords within a certain way based on their experience, what they're looking to import. And so to try to remove some of the ambiguity, Customs has created specific legal rules for how we go about the classification process to remove that subjectivity, essentially looking to create a structured hierarchy for analyzing the merchandise we're looking to import and determining the correct tariff provision. So there are 6 general rules of interpretation that should be used as a guiding light anytime you go about a classification. Even in the instances where it may seem simple on its face, it's certainly worthwhile to consider, did I follow the GRIs correctly to ensure that the classification you landed on is going to be accurate and is not going to be questioned any further. So the first GRI that we're looking at today is called the GRI 1, super simple. Classification is determined by the literal terms of the headings, subheadings, chapter notes, statistical notes, etc. And so when you open up the HTS book, in most cases, I would imagine you're using the HTS info search on the CBP website, which is not necessarily a problem. I always encourage the use of the actual physical chapters, because those do include all of the relevant notes that we need to be mindful of, as well as the footnotes. And then that obviously leads us into additional tariffs and things like that. So pretty self-explanatory. The first one, you're reading, taking note of all the keywords for the headings, the subheadings, the article descriptions, as well as the relevant chapter notes. I would encourage you to, in the instance where you have something that feels pretty simple and you land on a classification, go back through the chapter notes and statistical notes, US notes, to confirm that there isn't some particular note that speaks to your item in question that might lead it to be classified elsewhere. A perfect example of this is Christmas tree candles. Now, there is a specific chapter covering festive articles, including Christmas articles. And so naturally, I would think, oh, well, that's what my item is. It should be classified there. But if you go to chapter 95 and take a closer look, there's a specific note calling out that candles in particular are not covered by this chapter. And so that would then lead you to classify the candles as the commodity, as what it actually is, a candle, rather than a festive Christmas article. Moving forward, please. All right, GRI 2. So this one, again, I think pretty self-explanatory. Unassembled or incomplete goods are classified as the finished article. And now the key here is, do those disassembled parts together have the same essential character as the completed item? Now, a great example of this would be, a bicycle, for example. These are typically, in some cases shipped disassembled with their parts assembled here in the US after import. And so as long as all of the parts are present, then that would be considered a bicycle. Now, if that is being imported, let's say, without the tires and it's simply just a frame, not a workable bicycle, then we would have to have a conversation around the fact that, do the remaining items constitute the essential character of a finished bike, which in my opinion, I would say no. GRI 2B is a little bit more specific. It speaks to mixtures or combinations of materials and substances. This is something that we don't see super frequently in the apparel world. And more often than not, when you get to 2B, that means that you couldn't apply GRIs 1 through 2A to this point. And so you land on 2B, and it's a direct continuation into GRI 3. Which has a few different callouts that specifically helps us to figure out items that could essentially be classified in more than one heading, subheading. Now, the 3 things that we can apply here are the most specific description prevails. I've had this question kind of posed to me numerous times, where there is a quote unquote other rate that is a more of a catch-all term for things that are not previously articulated earlier in the book, or sorry, earlier in that chapter. And so we always want to be mindful of, if the classification specifically speaks, if the subheading, heading, article description terms specifically speak to the item that I'm looking to classify, then more likely than not, that is where we're going to classify that item. Secondly, here, GRI 3B is, again, speaks to what gives the item its essential character. Now, certain items can be multifunction, and it can be difficult to think about, well, what is like the true essential character of this item? And in those instances, you really want to break down, if you were to remove one function or the other, could the item still be used for another purpose? And more often than not, that's going to guide you towards what is actually the essential character. The final GRI here, under number 3, option C, is, if still unresolved, we choose the heading that occurs last in numerical order. Now, this comes up in apparel pretty frequently, particularly with unisex type items that can be intended for wear by men or women. And this rule applies in the fashion that women's articles are always after men's in the HTS book. So if we have let's say a jacket that we're looking to classify that is unisex, we would go from 6101 to 6102 for women's items and classify it there. Okay, GRI number 4. So this is something that has been used more and more, I think, as we've, as the past 20 years or so have passed with the introduction of more complex technological items. So essentially, if there is not a specific term that applies, again, referring to the heading, subheading, statistical notes for a given commodity, then we need to use something that is similar to that. So a good example here would be, smartwatch. Obviously, these have become more and more popular over the last number of years, and the HTS book is not updated wholesale very frequently. I think it's every 7 years, I want to say. And so there's no specific call out for a smartwatch. But when we think about, again, what is that item's essential character? What's its essential function? Telling time, being used as a watch, would lead us to classify it under the watch chapter.
Yeah, this is actually my favorite one, especially around like new products being built and things like that. My favorite story of this is actually when, throwback to when onesies like came out of nowhere, like the pajama onesies, and there was a lot of misclassification of those because there was no specific term for a onesie in regards to this new product. So Customs came and said, nope, this is a pajama, and that's what you should classify it as. So this is one of my favorite ones for sure.
Okay, GRI 5. So this one specifically speaks to cases and packaging. So cases that are specifically fitted for the given commodity it will be holding are intended for long-term use, intended for repetitive use. We're talking about cases for instruments, cameras, jewelry, maybe a firearm, for example. Those cases are classified as if they are part of the item. Similarly, with single-use packaging, which obviously is very common in the apparel world, poly bags, for example, hang tags, things like that, classified with the item itself as well, assuming it's not intended for repetitive use and it has no essential character of its own.
Yeah, important note here on GRI 5 in relation to the single-use packaging for all the apparel companies out there is, as you're getting a commercial invoice from your supplier, if they are consolidating that price with a line of the apparel item being imported, we highly recommend to break that out. Just in case customs does come knocking and they want to understand what is the transaction behind this invoice, that you can clearly tell them upfront, hey, this is a jacket with some packaging, and the packaging cost went into the jacket as far as classification and entered value goes. So just a heads up, we see it kind of often where it's consolidated and we don't really know. So always recommend having incredibly detailed invoices breaking that out.
Awesome. And so we arrive here at the end, GRI 6. And this one specifically speaks to the idea that we are implementing the use of the GRIs in order 1 through 6 or 1 through 5 as we go through our classification process. Now, GRI 6 specifically states to the fact that we want to apply the same logic at every step of the journey. And so what that means is determining the chapter in question, going to the heading, going to the subheading, going to the article description and the statistical suffix at the 8 or 10 digit level. At each point, we want to ensure that we're going through our GRIs 1 through 5 in order to continue to ensure that we're following the law of the land to a T.
Yeah, I would say that if you're ending up on GRI 6, you should call your broker and make sure that you didn't miss anything along that journey. This is the last step, and yeah, be sure to find somebody who's an expert in this to help you out if you land on GRI 6. Perfect. Well, we just went through all the GRIs, which are, as you can see, pretty complicated in how customs expects importers to be classifying their products and, kind of holding them accountable if anything was wrong. But why is this important for apparel brands specifically? Right, this GRIs provide a structure, but not certainty. As you can see, things can move around. But what's really interesting for apparel classifications is that it's highly sensitive to what is it made of, how is it made, knit or woven, and if there's any kind of unique design details, left over right buttons, right over left, some kind of interesting rulings out there around that. And small changes to the above mentioned can trigger a new heading and a new duty rate, but not always. I just want to call that out, that it's not a simple, if made of cotton always, then it's going to be lower than polyester. There are some situations where that is true, but always be sure to follow the GRIs, classify compliantly, and you'll find some duty savings along the way. But when you're thinking about these products, right, to use this as an example, let's say that you are working on your winter 27, right? So you're already out there looking at it, and you have a product that you're going to make, which is this jacket here. It is made in India, but you have two choices. It can be made wholly of cotton, or it can be made of poly and nylon, right? You're sitting there going, what is my choice here? Obviously, diving into the QC, that's one thing. But if you're just looking at the classification and the cost thereof, we're just going to dive into that right now. So same jacket, different fabric, different HTS, and therefore a different duty. So we'll take a look quickly at the knitted of cotton, and you'll see here on the right-hand side is the HTS book, and you'll see that we're at 6102 for jackets, women's jackets. We jump down to where it says of cotton, and then we jump down to where it says women's. So great. The general rate for this product, if knitted and of cotton, is going to be 15.9%. Just a quick heads up, though, that's not the final rate of this product. As we've all know, there's reciprocal rates, there's cotton fees, things of that nature. So the actual rate of this good made in India would actually be 40.9% plus a small cotton fee per kilogram. So just a quick heads up that the HTS book rate is not the final rate. There are some layers to that, but always want to use the import application to be able to get those details. Cool. Jumping over to the next one, which is the same jacket, but it's of poly and nylon. So you'll see here that we've landed now on 6102.30, which is of man-made fibers, poly and nylon, and then jumping down into 2010 of women, right? So here we are, 28.2% is the general duty rate for this jacket. And like in the previous slide, that's not the end all be all. There is a 25% additional reciprocal rate on top of this product. So at the end of the day, this product ends up being 53.2% duties and fees coming at your door. Now, when you take a look at that, right, from a strategic lens, and you cross compare those two, there is an obvious favorite here, which is the knitted of cotton, right? At scale of importing this product over time, you are going to be, strategically ahead of your competitors who are maybe not thinking about classification in regards to costs. The beautiful thing about this as well is that we established a general rate difference. The reciprocal rates, those are out of our hands, right? Those are trade policies that are going to happen in the background that we can't control. But finding the correct base HTS and the general rate, those rarely change, right? The HTS do change. There's some changes to general rates, but they're infrequent. So just here alone, this is a long-term solution, right? This is something that you will get a lower general rates no matter what country you source from. So this is a beautiful way to kind of move that forward. Perfect. So short and sweet. Wanted to keep this. We know it's Friday ahead of Valentine's Day, so we want to get this in front of you and really try to educate you on why classification is super important for apparel companies. Additionally, how complex it is and what are the rule sets to kind of follow along. If you have any questions on product classification, Alex, my co-host here, is an expert in it, and we'll help you walk through every single detail of your upcoming product line, a product in transit. It doesn't matter. Bring it to Alex. We will help. And if you're looking to identify what is your duty rates for products that are coming into the United States, go ahead and check out Importal. We have a Duty Calculator Pro, stays up to date on all the tariffs that come through. So super excited to get everybody here. Alex, any closing thoughts on HTS?
I would just say, it's something that classification in general is something that I always encourage importers to really empower themselves to understand. I think it can go a long way in terms of knowing what the implication of your classifications and duty rates are going to be on your bottom line. And there are a lot of resources available to you out there that CBP has produced. They can be a little difficult to find, but the informed compliance publications available on CBP's website. There's one specifically on the topic of apparel. And I feel like that's a really worthwhile resource to leverage for importers, given that there is a layman's term definition that we all agree, most people might agree is the exact definition, but CBP has created, a different definition to, create a distinction within the tariff book. And so some of those terms are really important to know when you go through the classification journey to ensure that you consider your item the same way that Customs and Border Protection does, to ensure that there's no questions asked at during the liquidation process when they're reviewing classification accuracy.
Absolutely. Love that. That's a great way to close right there. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much. Have a great end to your week and look forward to hearing from you.